Admiral Kim Tae-hyung stood on the bridge of his massive warship, called the Eternal Dominance. The ship was 3 kilometers long and had enough weapons to destroy entire planets. It was the pride of the Galactic consul fleet, and had been used to intimidate dozens of younger species into submission. Admiral Kim had been commanding consul fleets for 40 years, and he had never seen anything like what the humans were doing. 2 weeks had passed since the humans walked out of the negotiations at Harmony Point. Every day Admiral Kim expected to see human warships approaching consul territory, or to intercept angry messages from Earth demanding better treatment. Instead, there was nothing but silence. His communication officers sent messages to human ships and colonies every day, but never received even a simple acknowledgement. The Admiral paced back and forth on his bridge. His 4 yellow eyes studied the tactical display that showed human territories. The display was filled with red dots representing human ships and space stations. All of them were still active and following their normal routines, but they might as well have been empty metal shells floating in space for all the communication they provided. Lieutenant Commander Park Sun-hee was the Admiral's intelligence officer. She had been studying human behavior patterns for 3 years, and she was more confused than anyone else. She stood next to the Admiral holding a datapad filled with reports from scouts and spy networks. She told the Admiral that human ships were still running their regular patrol routes. Human cargo vessels were still carrying supplies between colonies. Human military bases were still maintaining full alert status. Everything looked completely normal except for the absolute silence. Every attempt to communicate with humans was simply ignored. The Admiral's tactical officer was a nervous Pixelarian named Zex, whose antenna twitched constantly. He suggested that maybe the humans were planning some kind of surprise attack. All this silence could be covering up massive military preparations. Maybe they were building secret weapons or gathering their fleets for a coordinated strike. Admiral Kim considered this possibility, but something about it felt wrong. In his long career, he had faced many different species, and all of them followed similar patterns when preparing for war. There were always signs. Military exercises increased, supply shipments grew larger, civilian populations were evacuated from border regions, messages were sent to allies asking for support. The humans were doing none of these things. Their military maintained exactly the same routine they had followed for months. Their supply ships carried the same cargo. They always did. Their civilians continued their normal lives without any sign of preparation for war. It was as if the humans had simply decided that the Galactic consul no longer existed. Dr. Yoon Naeun watched the alien ships from her hidden observation post in the Kepler asteroid belt. Her small research station was disguised to look like a mining facility, but it was actually one of humanity's most advanced intelligence gathering centers. She had been monitoring consul communications for years, and she was amazed by what she was hearing. The alien military commanders were becoming increasingly frustrated and confused. They kept sending larger and more impressive fleets toward human territory, expecting to provoke some kind of response. Human sensors tracked every alien ship that approached their borders, but the humans never sent any warnings or threats. They simply watched and recorded everything. Dr. Yoon had studied alien psychology for 15 years, and she understood what was happening. The species in the Galactic consul were all highly social creatures who communicated constantly. Even their wars followed predictable patterns of threats and responses. They literally could not understand a species that chose to remain silent or listen to intercepted messages between alien commanders. The Vraxian fleet leader was convinced that humans were planning to use some kind of invisible weapon that could strike without warning. The Zephyrian admiral believed that human silence meant they were preparing to surrender and were too ashamed to admit defeat. The Calthonian Military Council thought humans were gathering allies from unknown regions of space. Each alien species was interpreting the silence differently, but they were all becoming more worried and paranoid. With each passing day, Dr. Yoon sent encrypted reports to Earth describing how the alien fleets were starting to behave erratically. Some ships were running constant battle drills. Others were scanning empty space looking for hidden human vessels that did not exist. Commander Choi Dae-ho commanded a small human patrol ship on the edge of consul space. His ship, The Silent Runner was one of 50 vessels that had been positioned to monitor alien reactions to the communication blackout. He watched as alien fleets approached human territory, made threatening gestures, and then retreated when they received no response. The aliens seemed to expect humans to react to their presence with either fear or aggression. When human ships simply observed them without any communication, the aliens became confused and angry. Choi watched consul fleets practicing attack formations against imaginary human targets. They were preparing for battles that would never happen. 3 weeks after the silence began, Choi observed something that made him smile. A large Vraxian fleet had spent 5 days trying to provoke a response from the human colony at Proxima Centauri. They had approached the colony, performed mock attacks, and broadcast threatening messages. The human defense platforms had tracked their every move but said nothing. Finally, the Vraxian commander had ordered his fleet to withdraw, but as they left, they accidentally flew too close to a Zephyrian patrol. The Zephyrians interpreted this as a hostile act and demanded an explanation. When the Vraxians tried to explain that they had been testing human defenses, the Zephyrians accused them of lying and said they must be working with the humans. The argument escalated until both fleets were pointing weapons at each other. Instead of fighting humans, the aliens were starting to fight each other. The silence was making them so paranoid that they were seeing threats and conspiracies everywhere. Engineer Song Hyun worked at a monitoring station that tracked economic activity throughout the galaxy. Her computers analyzed shipping patterns, resource flows, and industrial production. Her reports showed that the consul economy was starting to change in strange ways. Military spending had increased by 60% as alien species built more warships and defensive systems to protect against the mysterious human threat. Civilian shipping was being delayed as merchant vessels were diverted to serve as military transports. Trade routes that had operated smoothly for centuries were experiencing disruptions as nervous alien traders avoided areas near human space. The most interesting change was in communication patterns. Normally, the different species in the consul sent thousands of messages to each other every day, coordinating trade diplomacy and military activities. But now many of those messages were accusations and demands for explanations. Species were starting to suspect each other of making secret deals with humans. Song Hyun watched as ancient alliances began to show cracks. The Vraxians accused the Pixlarians of sharing intelligence with human spies. The Zephyrians demanded that the Calthonians prove they were not secretly negotiating with Earth. Trade agreements that had lasted for generations were being questioned and reviewed. The irony was not lost on her. By doing absolutely nothing, humanity was causing more disruption to the Galactic consul than any military action could have achieved. The aliens were defeating themselves through their own paranoia and suspicion. Captain Lee Minho received daily reports from all the monitoring stations, and he was amazed by what he was reading. The alien fleets were exhausting themselves with constant alerts and battle drills. Their crews were becoming tired and stressed from months of preparation for an attack that never came. The consul government was spending enormous amounts of money on military preparations that were not needed. Their economy was straining under the cost of maintaining such high levels of readiness. Different species were starting to blame each other for the crisis, and old rivalries were beginning to surface. Most importantly, the unified front that had seemed so strong during the negotiations was starting to crack. Some species were beginning to question whether the hard-line approach toward humans had been the right choice. Others were wondering if they should try to restart negotiations before the situation got worse. Captain Lee smiled as he read the latest intelligence reports. The humans had not fired a single shot or sent a single threatening message, but they were winning a war that the aliens did not even realize they were fighting. The greatest weapon in humanity's arsenal was not their technology or their military might, but their ability to remain patient and let their enemies defeat themselves. The silence continued, and with each passing day, the confusion and paranoia among the alien species grew stronger. Humanity was proving that sometimes the most powerful action was to take no action at all. Captain Lee Minho walked into the big meeting room on the space station called Harmony Point. The room was full of strange alien sounds. Some aliens made clicking noises with their claws. Others whistled through holes in their faces. A few made deep, rumbling sounds that shook the metal floor. Captain Lee kept his face calm, but inside he felt tired. These talks had been going on for 3 weeks, and nothing good was happening. The human team sat at a round table made of some kind of blue metal. That felt cold to touch. Ambassador Park Ji-woo sat next to Captain Lee. She was the best negotiator Earth had ever sent to space. Her black hair was pulled back tight, and her dark suit looked perfect even after weeks of these difficult meetings. She had a small computer tablet in front of her with all the details of what humanity needed. Around the big room, 12 different alien species sat at their own tables. Each species looked completely different from humans and from each other. The Vraxians looked like giant birds with bright red and blue feathers that moved when they got excited. Their leader kept flapping his wings every time he disagreed with something. The Zephyrians were made of what looked like living crystal that changed colors when they spoke. Their voices sounded like music, but not the good kind. The Calthonians were the biggest aliens in the room. They looked like huge bears but had 6 arms instead of 4 legs, and they were covered in thick gray fur that seemed to move by itself. Their military leader was so big his chair looked like it might break. The Pixlarians were small and thin with long antennae on their heads that twitched when they were nervous. Right now their antennae were moving so fast, they looked like they might fly off. Dr. Kim Soo-jin sat behind Ambassador Park taking notes on everything that happened. She was humanity's expert on alien behavior, and she had been studying these species for months. Her job was to understand how these aliens thought and what they really wanted. She had warned the human team that these negotiations would be hard, because the aliens did not see humans as equals. The meeting had started early in the morning with the same argument they had been having. For weeks, humanity needed space to grow. Earth was getting crowded, and humans had found 3 star systems that would be perfect for new colonies. The systems were far from any alien territories and had planets that humans could live on safely. They also wanted mining rights to some asteroids that were full of rare metals that Earth needed. The problem was that every alien species in the Galactic Consul thought they owned everything in space. Even empty systems that no one had ever visited were claimed by one alien group or another. They treated humans like children who did not understand how the galaxy worked. They offered humans one small planet in a system that was so far from Earth that it would take 50 years to travel there. The Vraxian leader stood up and his feathers ruffled with anger. He pointed one wing at the human table and made loud screeching sounds. The translator box on the table turned his words into human language, but the anger came through clearly. He said, the humans were asking for too much. 3 whole star systems was more than most alien species got when they first joined the Galactic Consul. He said humans should be grateful that the great and ancient species of the galaxy were willing to give them anything at all. After all, humans had only been in space for a few hundred years, while some of these aliens had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. The Zephyrian delegate made musical sounds that the translator said meant agreement. Her crystal body flashed bright yellow, which Dr. Kim had learned meant the Zephyrians were feeling superior. The translator said she thought humans needed to learn their place in the galaxy. Humans were newcomers who had not earned the right to demand equal treatment with species that had built the great galactic civilization. Ambassador Park listened to all of this with a calm expression on her face. She had heard the same arguments every day for 3 weeks. These aliens saw humans as inferior beings who should accept whatever small gifts the established powers were willing to give them. The aliens seemed to think they were being very generous by offering humans anything at all. The Calthonian military advisor was the worst. Of all, he was so big that when he stood up, he blocked the light from the ceiling. His 6 arms moved as he spoke, and his voice was so deep, it made the walls vibrate. He said that if humans refused the generous offer they had been given, they would learn what happened to species who defied the will of the Galactic Consul. He told stories about dozens of other species who had been too proud to accept their place in the galactic order. These species had been crushed by the combined military might of the Consul. Their planets had been blockaded until they agreed to accept whatever terms the Consul offered. Some species had been completely destroyed, as examples to others who might think about resisting. The translator made his threats sound even worse in human language. He said humans were weak and their technology was primitive compared to the great warships of the consul. He said human colonies could be wiped out in days if the consul decided to teach humanity a lesson about respect and obedience. Captain Lee felt his anger growing, but he kept his face neutral. He had commanded human warships for 15 years, and he knew that human military technology was not as primitive as these aliens believed. Humans had some advantages that these aliens did not know about. But starting a war with the entire Galactic Consul would be suicide for humanity. Even if humans won some battles, they would eventually be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Dr. Kim was writing notes very fast. Her studies had shown her that these alien species were all very social creatures who communicated constantly with each other. They could not understand the human ability to be quiet and think before acting. To them, silence meant either complete submission or preparation for immediate attack. There was no middle ground in their thinking. The Pixelarian trade representative spoke next. His antenna twitched nervously as he explained that the consul had been very patient with human demands. Most species had to wait centuries before being allowed to colonize. Even one New World humans were being offered this opportunity after only 50 years of contact with galactic civilization. This showed how generous and forgiving the great species of the galaxy could be. Ambassador Park had been quiet for over an hour, listening to the same arguments and threats she had been hearing for weeks. Every proposal humanity made was rejected. Every counter-offer the aliens made was worse than the last one. It was clear that these aliens had no intention of treating humans as equals. They wanted humans to accept a position as junior partners who would be grateful for any scraps thrown their way. The room grew quiet as everyone waited for the human response. All the aliens leaned forward, expecting to hear either desperate pleas for better terms or angry threats of war. This was how negotiations always went with younger species. They either begged for mercy or made foolish challenges that led to their destruction. Instead, Ambassador Park did something that none of the aliens expected. She stood up slowly and gathered her computer tablet and papers. She nodded politely to each alien delegation and spoke in a calm, clear voice that the translator carried to every species in the room. She said that humanity had listened carefully to all the perspectives that had been shared. She thanked the alien delegates for their time and their explanations of how galactic politics worked. She said that humans would take time to consider the position that the Galactic Consul had presented. She said the human delegation would be returning to Earth to discuss these matters with their government. Captain Lee stood up with her, and the rest of the human team followed. Dr. Kim packed her notes and computers without saying a word. The whole human delegation walked toward the door in complete silence. The alien delegates looked at each other with confusion. In their experience, failed negotiations led to immediate responses. Species either accepted bad terms out of fear, or they made angry threats about military action, or they tried desperate last-minute bargaining. But humans were doing none of these things. They were simply leaving. The Vraxian leader called out, asking when humans would return with their answer. Ambassador Park turned at the door and said that humanity would respond when they had finished considering all the options. Then, the human delegation left the room, leaving dozens of confused and worried aliens behind. Captain Lee sent a coded message to all human ships and stations in the sector. The message was short and simple. Protocol 7 was now in effect. All human vessels and installations should maintain defensive positions but begin complete communication silence with all non-human entities. They should acknowledge the order with actions, not words. Within 6 hours, every human presence in known space had gone completely silent. The silence from humanity stretched into its 4th month, and the effects were spreading across the entire galaxy, like a disease that infected minds instead of bodies. Admiral Kim Tae-hyung had not slept properly in weeks. His once proud fleet was showing signs of serious strain. Crew members were reporting strange dreams about invisible human ships attacking in the night. Some officers were seeing threats that did not exist. The admiral stood in his command center staring at star maps that showed human territory marked in red. Every day, those red zones seemed more threatening, even though nothing about them had actually changed. Human ships continued their normal patrols. Human colonies maintained their regular activities. Human space. Stations processed cargo and supplies exactly as they always had. But the silence made everything seem sinister and dangerous. Lieutenant Commander Park Sun-hee approached the Admiral with another report. Her face looked tired and worried. She had been analyzing human behavior patterns for months, trying to find some clue about what they were planning. Her data showed that human military forces had not increased their readiness level at all. They were maintaining exactly the same defensive posture they had held for years. She told the Admiral that this consistency was the most frightening thing of all. If humans were planning an attack, they should be moving ships, gathering supplies, or conducting training exercises. Instead, they were acting as if the entire Galactic consul did not exist. This complete indifference was more unsettling than any threat could have been. The Admiral's communication officer reported that 3 more consul species had accused each other of secret negotiations. With Earth, the Thoranian Trade Federation claimed that the Zelkite mining consortium was selling rare metals to human colonies. The Zelkites responded by accusing the Thoranians of using human shipping companies to avoid consul taxes. These accusations were becoming more frequent and more serious. Every day, new conspiracy theories spread through the alien networks. Some species believed that humans had already infiltrated consul governments. Others thought that human agents were sabotaging alien communication systems. A few groups claimed that the silence was covering up a massive human military buildup in unexplored regions of space. Dr. Yoon Nayoon monitored these developments from her hidden station with a mixture of fascination and concern. Her psychological studies had predicted that the alien species would react badly to prolonged silence, but even she was surprised by how quickly paranoia was spreading. The social creatures of the consul literally could not function without constant communication and confirmation from others. She watched as trade relationships that had existed for centuries began to collapse. Merchant ships that had traveled the same routes for generations were now being searched and questioned at every checkpoint. Alien customs officials were looking for evidence of human infiltration or secret cargo trade that should have taken days was now taking weeks. As security procedures became more complex, the economic data that engineer Song Haeon collected showed the dramatic cost of this paranoia. Military spending had doubled again as each species tried to prepare for threats they could not identify or understand. Civilian production was being converted to military use as alien governments demanded more weapons and defensive systems. The most alarming trend was the breakdown of information sharing between consul species. Intelligence agencies that had cooperated for millennia were now withholding data from each other. Each species was convinced that their allies might be working with humans, so they stopped sharing important military and economic information. Commander Choi Daeho observed the results of this breakdown from his patrol ship near the border between Vraxian and Zephyrian territory. What had once been a peaceful boundary with regular diplomatic contact had become a tense military zone. Both species had moved large fleets to the area and were conducting aggressive patrols. The Vraxians claimed they were protecting against human infiltration through Zephyrian space. The Zephyrians insisted they were preventing Vraxian collaboration with human agents. Neither side trusted the other, and both were convinced that humans were somehow involved in their growing conflict. Choi watched as minor incidents escalated into serious confrontations. A Vraxian patrol ship scanned a Zephyrian merchant vessel looking for human technology. The Zephyrian captain interpreted this as an act of piracy and called for military support. Within hours, 2 small fleets were facing each other across a few kilometers of empty space with weapons powered and targeting systems locked. Similar incidents were happening throughout consul space. The silence from humanity was acting like a magnifying glass that made every small disagreement seem like evidence of a vast conspiracy. Species that had been allies for thousands of years were starting to view each other with suspicion and fear. Captain Lee Minho received reports about these developments with mixed feelings. He was proud that humanity's strategy was working so effectively, but he was also concerned about the long-term consequences. The goal had been to gain respect and fair treatment from the Galactic consul, not to destroy the entire galactic civilization. The human leadership on Earth was meeting daily to discuss how long the silence should continue. Some officials wanted to maintain the communication blackout until the consul offered much better terms. Others worried that the EU and galaxy was becoming too unstable, and that humanity might be blamed for any disasters that occurred. Dr. Kim Soo-jin, the human expert on alien psychology, advised caution in her reports to Earth. She explained that the consul species were reaching a breaking point where their fear and paranoia might lead to irrational and destructive actions. The silence had been more effective than anyone had imagined, but it was also more dangerous. She warned that some alien species might decide to attack human territory not because they had evidence of human aggression, but because the uncertainty was driving them toward desperate action. Fear could make rational beings do incredibly stupid things, and the entire galaxy was now living in a state of constant fear. The paranoia reached new levels when the Calthonian Military Council announced that they had detected signs of human activity in the neutral zone between consul and unexplored space. They claimed that long-range sensors had identified artificial structures that could only be secret human bases. Other species demanded to see this evidence, but the Calthonians refused to share their data, claiming that human spies in other governments would use the information to help Earth. The refusal to share intelligence made other species even more suspicious. Some began to wonder if the Calthonians were lying to justify their own aggressive expansion. The Pixlarian trade networks reported massive disruptions as shipping companies refused to travel through areas where human presence was suspected or rumored. Insurance rates for cargo vessels increased dramatically as the perceived risk of human attacks grew. Some trade routes that had operated profitably for centuries became too expensive to maintain. The breakdown was accelerating beyond anything the human planners had anticipated. What had started as a simple negotiation tactic was reshaping the entire political and economic structure of galactic civilization. The silence was proving that sometimes the absence of action could be more powerful than any direct intervention. Fleet movements throughout consul space became increasingly erratic and aggressive. Military commanders who had once followed careful procedures were now acting on rumors and suspicions. Patrol schedules that had maintained peace for generations were being changed daily, as paranoia drove new security requirements. The unity that had made the Galactic consul a powerful force was crumbling. The shared trust and communication that held the alliance together was being destroyed by fear of an enemy that existed mainly in their own imagination. Humanity had found the one weakness that all these advanced civilizations shared: their complete dependence on constant social interaction and confirmation. As the fourth month of silence ended, it was clear that the galaxy would never be the same. The paranoia had taken hold so deeply that even if humans started communicating again, the damage to consul unity might be permanent. The greatest military alliance in galactic history was destroying itself from within, and humanity had accomplished this incredible feat by simply choosing to remain quiet. The first shots of the war within the Galactic consul were fired on a Tuesday morning in the 7th month of human silence. A Vraxian patrol cruiser called the Talon Strike detected what its sensors claimed was a cloaked human vessel near the Zephyrian colony world of Crystal Falls. The Vraxian captain immediately demanded that the Zephyrian Defense Forces reveal the location of the hidden ship. The Zephyrian commander insisted that no human vessels were present in their system. Their own sensors showed nothing unusual except for the aggressive behavior of the Vraxian patrol. The Zephyrians accused the Vraxians of creating false sensor readings to justify an invasion of their territory. Within hours, the argument escalated beyond all reason. The Vraxian captain was convinced that the Zephyrians were lying to protect their human allies. The Zephyrian commander believed that the Vraxians were using the human silence as an excuse to attack a longtime rival. Both sides called for military reinforcements, and what had started as a minor disagreement became a full-scale confrontation. Admiral Kim Tae-hyung watched the battle reports with horror from his flagship. The two alien fleets were destroying each other with a fury that seemed impossible to stop. Vraxian bird-like warships dove through crystal formations that the Zephyrians had arranged as defensive barriers. The beautiful singing sounds that Zephyrian weapons made were now screams of death and destruction. The fighting spread rapidly as other consul species were forced to choose sides. The Pixlarians supported the Vraxians, claiming that the Zephyrians had always been too friendly with unknown alien species. The Calthonians backed the Zephyrians, arguing that the Vraxians had become too aggressive and paranoid about human threats. Admiral Kim tried to restore order by sending messages to all the fighting fleets. He reminded them that the real enemy was humanity, not each other. But his words fell on deaf ears. The months of paranoia and suspicion had poisoned the relationships between species that had been allies for thousands of years. The war that erupted was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of the organized campaigns that had characterized previous consul conflicts, this was a chaotic explosion of violence driven by fear and mistrust. Fleets attacked each other based on rumors and suspicions rather than actual military objectives. Engineer Song Haeun monitored the economic collapse that followed the outbreak of fighting. Trade networks that had taken centuries to build were destroyed in days. Supply chains that supported billions of beings across hundreds of worlds were cut off. Industrial production crashed as factories were converted to military use or simply abandoned. The most devastating effect was on civilian populations throughout consul space. Colonies that had depended on regular supply shipments found themselves isolated and struggling to survive. Worlds that had specialized in producing specific goods for galactic trade were left with useless surpluses while desperately needing basic necessities. Dr. Yoon Naeun watched the breakdown of galactic civilization with a mixture of amazement and guilt. Her studies of alien psychology had predicted that the species would react badly to human silence, but she had never imagined that the reaction would be this extreme. The social creatures of the consul were tearing apart the very foundations of their society. She intercepted communications between alien commanders that revealed the depth of their paranoia. Some believed that the human silence had been a signal for hidden human agents to begin sabotage operations. Others thought that humanity had developed mind control technology that was turning consul species against each other. The truth was much simpler, but the aliens could not accept it. Humanity had done nothing except remain quiet, but the lack of communication had created a vacuum that the aliens filled with their own fears and suspicions. The silence had become a mirror that reflected the worst aspects of their own nature. Commander Choi Daiho observed the fighting from his patrol ship with growing concern. What had started as a brilliant psychological strategy was turning into a galactic catastrophe. The human government had wanted to gain respect and fair treatment, but they had not intended to destroy the entire consul alliance. The battles were spreading across multiple star systems as old rivalries and disputes that had been suppressed for generations erupted into open warfare. The Thoranian Trade Federation attacked Zelkite mining operations, claiming they were secretly supplying humans with strategic materials. The Zelkites responded by targeting Thoranian civilian transport ships. Each attack led to counterattacks, and the cycle of violence grew worse with every passing day. Species that had never been enemies before were now engaged in bitter conflicts. The unity that had made the Galactic Consul the dominant power in the galaxy was completely shattered. Captain Lee Minho received emergency communications from Earth, asking for his assessment of the situation. The human government was deeply concerned about the unintended consequences of their silence strategy. Some officials wanted to break the communication blackout immediately and try to restore peace. Others argued that revealing humanity's role in the crisis would make things even worse. The military leadership was divided about what to do. Some commanders wanted to maintain the silence until the consul collapsed completely and humanity could emerge as the dominant galactic power. Others worried that the destruction of galactic civilization would ultimately harm human interests as well. Dr. Kim Soo-jin advised extreme caution in her reports to the human government. She explained that the alien species were now in a state of psychological breakdown where rational thought was nearly impossible. The paranoia and fear had become so intense that any communication from humanity might be interpreted as an act of war. The fighting continued to spread as more species joined the conflict. Each side accused the other of collaboration with the mysterious humans who remained completely silent throughout the chaos. The absence of any human response to the violence only increased the paranoia, as aliens wondered what humanity was planning while their galaxy tore itself apart. The economic costs of the war were staggering. Military spending had increased by over 300%, as each species tried to build enough weapons to fight all their former allies simultaneously. Industrial capacity that had been used to create art, science, and culture was now devoted entirely to instruments of destruction. The social costs were even higher. Alien children who had grown up thinking of other species as friends and partners now learned to see them as potential enemies. Cultural exchanges that had enriched galactic civilization for millennia were cancelled as species retreated into isolation, and suspicion. Fleet Admiral Park Kyung-soo commanded the human deep space monitoring network from a secret base beyond the galactic rim. His sensors tracked the battles raging throughout former consul territory. The alliance that had once seemed invincible was breaking apart like a house built on sand. He reported to Earth that the consul military forces were so focused on fighting each other that they posed no threat to human territory. Many alien fleets had been completely destroyed in fratricidal combat. Others were so damaged and demoralized that they could barely maintain basic operations. The irony was complete. The Galactic consul had possessed overwhelming military superiority over humanity, but their own paranoia and fear had turned that strength into weakness. They were destroying themselves more thoroughly than any human attack could have accomplished. As the 7th month of silence ended, the galaxy was in chaos. The great alliance that had ruled space for thousands of years had collapsed into warring factions. The economic system that had supported billions of beings was in ruins. The cultural achievements of galactic civilization were being abandoned as survival became the only priority. Humanity had achieved a victory more complete than their wildest dreams. But it was a victory that came with a terrible cost. Silence had proven more destructive than any weapon ever created, and the consequences would reshape the galaxy for generations to come. The message came on the first day of the 12th month, exactly 1 year after Ambassador Park Ji-woo had walked out of the failed negotiations at Harmony Point. It was a simple transmission sent on all frequencies used by the Galactic consul, but the words seemed to echo across the entire galaxy like thunder after a long silence. Fleet Commander Young Hyun-woo stood on the bridge of the human flagship Indomitable Spirit as he prepared to speak the first official words that any human had addressed to the alien powers in exactly 365 days. His crew watched him with mixture of pride and nervous anticipation. They had all played their part in the greatest psychological warfare campaign in galactic history. The message was brief and delivered in the same calm, polite tone that Ambassador Park had used when she announced humanity's withdrawal from negotiations. Young Hyun-woo looked directly into the communication array and spoke clearly. "We have considered your original proposal and find it acceptable. We are prepared to resume negotiations at your earliest convenience." The response from the remnants of the Galactic consul was immediate and desperate. Within hours, messages were flooding human communication, networks from dozens of alien species. All of them carried the same basic message. "Please talk to us. We accept your terms. We need to end this madness." The galaxy that humanity returned to was completely different from the one they had left in silence. The mighty Galactic consul had shattered into dozens of warring factions. Trade routes that had operated for centuries were now dangerous war zones. Entire star systems had been evacuated as civilian populations fled. The fighting Admiral Kim Tae-hyung was among the first alien commanders to respond to the human message. His once mighty fleet had been reduced to less than half its original strength after months of fighting other consul forces. His crews were exhausted and demoralized. His supply lines had been cut off and his government was on the verge of collapse. He sent a personal message to Fleet Commander Young Hyun-woo, begging for human intervention to stop the fighting. The admiral, who had once threatened to crush humanity for their arrogance, was now pleading for human help to restore peace to the galaxy. Ambassador Park Ji-woo returned to Harmony Point for the new negotiations, but the conference room was very different from the one she had left. The proud alien delegates who had once dismissed human demands as unreasonable were now desperate survivors of a galactic civil war. The Vraxian representative looked tired and defeated. His beautiful feathers were dull, and many were missing from stress and combat injuries. The Zephyrian delegate's crystal form was cracked and clouded. The musical tones of her voice had become harsh and discordant. The Calthonian military advisor was missing 2 of his 6 arms and walked with a heavy limp. These were not the same arrogant beings who had treated humanity as inferior children. They were broken creatures who had learned the hard way that their mighty alliance could be destroyed by something as simple as silence. The negotiations that had once seemed impossible were completed in less than 3 days. Every demand that humanity had originally made was granted without argument. The 3 star systems that humans wanted for colonization were handed over immediately. The mining rights to the asteroid belts were transferred to human control. Additional concessions that had never been part of the original discussions were offered freely. The alien delegates signed every agreement without even reading the details carefully. They were so desperate to end the communication silence and restore some kind of stability to their shattered galaxy that they would have agreed to almost anything. Captain Lee Minho watched the signing ceremony with mixed emotions. Humanity had achieved a victory more complete than anyone had dared to imagine. They had gained everything they wanted and more. But the cost had been the destruction of a galactic civilization that had taken thousands of years to build. Dr. Yun Nayun submitted her final report on the psychological effects of the silent strategy. Her analysis showed that the alien species had never recovered from the initial shock of human withdrawal. Their social nature made them completely vulnerable to this kind of psychological warfare. They simply could not function without constant communication and confirmation from others. The silence had revealed a fundamental weakness in the Galactic Alliance. The different species had never truly trusted each other. They had been held together by necessity and mutual benefit rather than genuine friendship. When that trust was tested by uncertainty and fear, it collapsed almost immediately. Engineer Song Haeun calculated the economic impact of the year-long crisis. Industrial production throughout the former consul territories had dropped by 70%. Trade volume had fallen by over 80%. Billions of beings were now living in poverty and uncertainty. The economic system that had supported galactic civilization was in ruins. The rebuilding process would take decades and would require massive human assistance. The species that had once looked down on humanity as primitive newcomers were now completely dependent on human technology resources and leadership. Dr. Kim Soo-jin analyzed the long-term implications of humanity's victory. The psychological trauma experienced by the alien species would affect their behavior for generations. They would never again dismiss human capabilities or treat humans as inferior beings. The fear of another silence would shape their diplomatic relations with humanity for centuries to come. Commander Choi Dae-ho supervised the gradual restoration of communication between human and alien forces. The process was slow and careful. Many alien commanders were still afraid that any wrong word might trigger another period of silence. Human officers had to reassure their former enemies that the communication blackout was over. The alien crews who had spent months in constant fear and paranoia found it difficult to adjust to normal operations. Some had developed severe psychological problems from the stress of uncertainty. Others had become so used to seeing threats everywhere that they could not function in peaceful conditions. Fleet Admiral Park Kyung-soo coordinated the massive humanitarian effort that humanity launched to help the surviving alien populations. Human ships carried food, medical supplies, and reconstruction materials to dozens of worlds that had been devastated by the Civil War. The irony was not lost on anyone. Humanity had caused the crisis that destroyed the Galactic consul, but they were also the only power capable of fixing the damage. The aliens who had once threatened to crush human civilization were now completely dependent on human charity and assistance. Captain Lee Minho reflected on the events of the past year as he watched human and alien crews working together to restore damaged space stations. The strategy had worked beyond their wildest expectations, but it had also taught humanity a sobering lesson about the power they possessed. The ability to remain silent when others expected communication had proven to be a devastating weapon. The social species of the galaxy could not understand or defend against this kind of psychological warfare. They were helpless against an enemy who simply refused to engage, but with great power came great responsibility. Humanity now found itself in the position of galactic leadership that they had never sought the destroyed alien civilizations looked to humans for guidance, protection, and support. The galaxy that had once dismissed humanity as irrelevant now depended on them for survival. The negotiations at Harmony Point established humanity as the dominant power in the galaxy, but they also established human responsibility for the welfare of all the species that had been damaged by the silence. The victory had come with a price that would have to be paid for generations. As the first year of the new galactic order began, humanity faced challenges they had never imagined. They had proven that sometimes the most powerful weapon was the choice not to use any weapon at all. The silence had been more effective than any military force, but it had also revealed the dangerous responsibility that came with such power. The galaxy would remember the year of silence as the time when everything changed. The mighty Galactic consul had fallen not to superior military might, but to something as simple as the absence of words. Humanity had learned that in a universe full of social species, the power to remain silent was the ultimate weapon. The war that the aliens had called impossible to fight was over, and humanity had won without firing a single shot. The victory belonged to those who understood that sometimes the most powerful action was to take no action at all.